Day 6. When Monique took the stand and shook the room to its core. The 6th day of the federal trial against Sean Diddy Combs began like so many others, reporters racing down corridors, hushed speculation echoing off the walls. Another day in a courtroom already bursting with scandal. But nothing could have prepared the public, the press, or even Diddy's legal team for what happened next. Because Monique, yes, that Monique, took the stand. In a matter of minutes, what had long been dismissed as a decades-old Hollywood feud transformed into a pivotal moment in federal testimony. And by the time she was finished, the names Diddy, Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, and Bishop T.D. Jakes were no longer just cultural giants. They were potential players in a network of influence now under a harsh, legal spotlight. She didn't arrive with fanfare. She didn't need to. Monique, the Oscar-winning actress, comedian, and long-silenced critic of the entertainment industry, entered through a side door with quiet determination. The gallery was already packed, reporters shoulder to shoulder, anticipating the next explosive headline. What they got was something else entirely. A reckoning. Diddy, seated in a charcoal suit, stiffened visibly. He leaned into his attorney, whispering urgently, a flicker of unease creeping across the composure he had maintained all week. Cameras weren't allowed, but courtroom sketch artists captured the moment. The narrowed eyes, the clenched jaw, the unraveling stoicism. Monique took the stand and sat upright, composed. When she spoke, it was with the calm authority of someone who had waited years to be heard. "I was asked here to speak the truth," she began. "And that's exactly what I intend to do." What followed wasn't speculation. It wasn't performance. It was documentation. For years, Monique had warned of systemic silencing in Hollywood. She had spoken publicly about being blackballed after refusing to play the game. She named names: Tyler Perry, Oprah Winfrey, Lee Daniels, and was ridiculed, branded bitter, exiled. But now, under oath, those same claims had the weight of federal scrutiny. With the judge's permission, Monique read aloud from a meticulously kept timeline. Her notes included dates, phone calls, personal meetings, conversations that painted a disturbing picture of manipulation hidden behind the industry's glittering facade. She recounted broken promises, withheld opportunities, and offers made in private that came with very public consequences. Prosecutors followed every word, nodding, flipping through documents that reportedly tied directly to Cassie Ventura's earlier testimony. Suddenly, this wasn't just the trial of Diddy. It was a trial of the culture that allowed him, and others, to operate unchecked. And then came her second bombshell. It wasn't aimed at Diddy. It was aimed at Tyler Perry, and it landed like a thunderclap. Monique recounted a private phone call from 2018 in which Perry allegedly admitted that her treatment by Hollywood had been unjust, that the blackballing was real, that he too had participated in it. "He told me he was wrong," she testified. "He said he would apologize. Publicly. He never did." The courtroom hung on every word. But she didn't stop there. According to Monique, Perry confided that a public apology would create collateral damage, blowback on others, who, in his words, weren't ready to be exposed. That line alone triggered a palpable shift in the room. Suddenly, this wasn't just about old grudges. It was about a pattern of protection, of hidden allegiances, and of power circles designed to punish non-compliance and reward silence. For the first time, names long revered in public were being spoken in a context far removed from Hollywood Walk of Fame stars and philanthropy banquets. And Diddy? The man who once commanded every room he walked into? He was no longer the most powerful presence there, because Monique wasn't just recounting personal pain. She was opening doors to hidden backrooms, buried deals, and conversations that might never have surfaced without a courtroom, a subpoena, and the courage to say, "This happened, and here's when. By the end of the day, the headlines had changed. The courtroom was no longer just about one man's alleged abuse of power. It had become a microscope on Hollywood itself, its alliances, its secrets, and the cost of truth. And this time, Monique wasn't being ignored. She was being heard. Monique names names and exposes the silence that protected Diddy. It was the kind of courtroom moment that doesn't just shift a narrative, it shatters it. When asked directly who Tyler Perry had been referring to in their now infamous phone conversation, Monique didn't hesitate. She turned to the jury, locked eyes, and delivered the name with devastating clarity. Puff. That's who he was worried about. Puff Daddy, Diddy, whatever you want to call him. A ripple of shock ran through the room. Even seasoned prosecutors, some of whom had sat through harrowing testimony all week, exchanged startled glances. This wasn't just Hollywood drama laid bare. This was the suggestion of industry-wide collusion, and it was now part of the federal record. Monique went further. She testified that Perry told her he couldn't apologize publicly, not because he didn't believe her, but because too many people were entangled in too many NDAs. Then, with measured calm, she pulled out a written transcript of that conversation. A private call, during which Perry allegedly said, "There are things going on that I can't be connected to publicly. We've all seen things at Puff's parties that we're not supposed to talk about." The courtroom held its breath. The judge allowed the transcript to be entered into evidence, though the accompanying audio recording would remain sealed, pending authentication. But the weight of that moment was unmistakable. This wasn't just about Diddy anymore. It was about who knew and said nothing. And according to Monique, there were more than a few. Diddy's defense team immediately objected, arguing that the testimony was speculative and inadmissible. But the prosecution countered and won. They argued successfully that Monique's statements provided critical context, not about Diddy's character, but about the machinery that shielded it, about the reputational firewalls built by other powerful figures, all determined to preserve an image, even if it meant preserving abuse. Then came the moment that no one in the courtroom would forget. Monique paused, adjusted her microphone, and said the words that would dominate headlines within the hour. "I've been to one of Diddy's parties, and I left because I saw something I wasn't supposed to." She described the night in chilling detail. The year was 2006. She was invited by a fellow actor, a friend, who said it would be a networking gold mine. The location, a sprawling estate tucked into the Hollywood Hills. Private security. Luxury cars. A valet took her phone. Inside, soft R&B played beneath candlelight. And guests, men and women, were being escorted quietly into back rooms. "I remember a woman in heels," she said, "and a man wearing nothing but a bathrobe." She recounted how one of Diddy's assistants approached her and offered what was pitched as comfort. "It's all about experience here. You're safe. If you sign the NDA," that was her cue. "That's when I walked out," Monique said. "I didn't sign. I never went back." What followed, she testified, was professional silence. Not the kind that comes from bad auditions or missed opportunities, but the kind that happens after you break an unspoken rule. Her phone stopped ringing. Major roles slipped away. Film festival invites vanished. When she reached out to a well-known producer, she was told she had become difficult. "I always suspected," she said quietly, "that my exit made me a liability." The prosecution pressed her. Did she believe her experience was typical of Diddy's events? She nodded. "I think it was orchestrated like a system," she said. "And when I refused to play along, I got cut out." That single statement echoed throughout the courtroom, because what Monique described, luxury parties masking exploitative rituals, silence enforced by contracts, reputations protected at the cost of truth, mirrored testimony given by Cassie Ventura and several other women. Candlelit rooms, coordinated escorts, surveillance systems, NDAs pitched as protection but functioning as muzzles. But Monique's account came from a different vantage point. She wasn't a subordinate. She wasn't someone auditioning for access. She was already a star, an Oscar winner, a woman who walked into the room with her name already made and left with her career quietly collapsing behind her. And that, perhaps more than any other detail, revealed the scope of what Cassie and others had been up against. Silence is the most expensive price. Monique connects the dots between power, pulpits, and protection. By the time the prosecution asked Monique whether she believed Tyler Perry had actively protected Sean Diddy Combs' public image, there was no hesitation, no softening, no PR-safe ambiguity. "Yes," she said flatly. "And I believe it was strategic, coordinated, and part of a larger effort to keep things quiet." That statement alone would have been enough to dominate headlines. But what came next lit the fuse on something far bigger, a long-ignored, rarely spoken reality of how power, celebrity, and religion intersect in America's most insulated circles. Monique brought up a moment many remembered, a viral video that once drew praise across social media. Tyler Perry walking into Bishop T.D. Jakes' megachurch, writing a $1 million check on stage in front of a roaring congregation. "People saw it as a blessing," Monique said, her voice sharp but steady. "But I saw a transaction." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even the judge glanced up. Jurors scribbled furiously in their notebooks as Monique continued. "That donation wasn't just charity, it was damage control. That church is a shield, and people like Diddy use it to build alliances that make them look untouchable." What once looked like philanthropy, she argued, was really PR wrapped in scripture, and she wasn't done. Monique then testified that in the weeks following Perry's donation to Jakes' church, rumors and blog posts that had been swirling about Diddy's infamous parties began quietly disappearing. No retractions, no corrections, just digital vanishing acts. "I knew then," she said, "that people were being paid, influenced, silenced. That $1 million wasn't just for Jakes, it was for peace. It was for silence." The prosecution moved quickly, displaying a photo exhibit, Perry and Diddy, just weeks after the donation, standing together at a BET gala, smiles wide, arms around each other, as though the air wasn't thick with allegation and suspicion. Monique paused, then turned to the judge. Not with anger, but with unwavering clarity. "You see, I'm not afraid of being blackballed anymore. I've been through it. And let me tell you something, silence is the most expensive price any of us pay. And we've all paid it." At that point, the courtroom fell still. What had begun as celebrity testimony had now morphed into something deeper. An indictment of a system where reputations are traded, silence is bought, and truth is collateral damage. Then came the moment that shifted the trial's trajectory. Monique reached into her bag and pulled out a printed transcript. "This is the call," she said, "the one where Tyler Perry admitted he was wrong." The room stirred. Gasps, whispers, even veteran court reporters stiffened. For years, Monique had publicly insisted that Perry once called her privately to apologize for how she'd been treated following the fallout from Precious. She had said he acknowledged that she was blackballed unfairly. But now, under oath, she wasn't just saying it. She was proving it. "I recorded the conversation," she stated. "He knew. I told him. He said he was fine with it." She handed the transcript to the bailiff. The judge skimmed the top lines, eyebrows raised. Then he nodded. The evidence was admissible. In the transcript, Perry reportedly says, "I know I messed up. You were never difficult. You just didn't want to work for free. I should have said that publicly." Then the call took a darker turn. Perry allegedly pivots. "But I can't go public. Puff's name is wrapped up in too much right now." For the prosecution, it was a turning point. They used this moment to reinforce a theme that had been building throughout the trial, that the wall surrounding Diddy wasn't just constructed by legal teams and bodyguards. It was held up by industry elites, even those with otherwise clean reputations, afraid of the ripple effect if his secrets ever unraveled. Monique continued. He told me that if Puff went down, a lot of people were going with him. People who fund movies, people who sign checks. At that, the courtroom stirred again, because that's what Gene Deal, Diddy's former bodyguard, had hinted at, what actor Christian Keyes alluded to. That Diddy's web wasn't just about parties and ego. It was institutional, a network of money, influence, and fear. Monique's voice cracked, not from fatigue, but conviction. He had a chance to clear my name, she said, eyes locked on the prosecution table. He didn't, because he was protecting something bigger than me, something darker than anyone wants to admit. The judge ruled the transcript admissible, and in that moment, what had once been called Monique's grudge transformed, on the record, into a thread of truth woven through a much larger fabric of protection, privilege, and silence. Let's talk about the list. Monique shatters Hollywood's code of silence. It was already a bombshell day for the prosecution. Federal evidence had been authenticated, transcripts admitted, and Diddy's attorneys looked visibly rattled. But when Monique calmly uttered the next name, the energy in the courtroom shifted from tension to shock. Oprah Winfrey. She didn't drop the name casually. She aimed it like a weapon. In 2010, I told Oprah something personal, Monique began, that I'd been abused as a child by my brother. She told me she'd never exploit that. A pause. But she did. The air inside the courtroom turned heavy. Monique detailed how, shortly after she declined to participate in the Precious press tour, a decision she says cost her not just work, but her public reputation, Oprah invited her brother onto her talk show. Not for healing, not with consent, but, in Monique's view, as a punishment. She said it was business, Monique testified. But I knew the truth. They were trying to shut me up. The room didn't know what to do with the weight of that accusation. But Monique wasn't finished. She pivoted seamlessly, strategically, connecting Oprah, Tyler Perry, and Diddy into a single triangle of power. Not through conspiracy, but through the infrastructure they shared. Publicists, legal teams, handlers, and crisis management firms. They all have the same people cleaning up messes, she said. I know this, because one of those PR reps accidentally forwarded me an email chain. Her voice never rose. It didn't have to. The substance did all the damage. Monique testified that this email chain, partially redacted but preserved, had her name, Diddy's name, and Tyler's name in the subject line. It wasn't just PR talk, it was a strategy session. How to manage optics, how to control the narrative, how to silence the noise. She handed over a redacted version of that email to the judge. It is now under judicial review. But even if the full content never reaches public eyes, its implication is already carved into the record. The courtroom sat frozen. The prosecution didn't need to add anything. Monique had made it plain. This wasn't about one man. It was a system, a silence machine, a mechanism designed to reward obedience and destroy dissent. And then, without a raised voice, without a dramatic gesture, she closed her binder, took a sip of water, and delivered the words that would ricochet across every news desk in the country. Now, let's talk about the list. The silence was total. The judge allowed her to continue. There is a list in Hollywood, she said. It's not written down, but everybody knows it exists. It's the list of people you don't speak against. The untouchables. Puff was on that list, Tyler was on that list, and Oprah, she practically created it. She explained that this list wasn't literal, but a boundary, a cultural line drawn in invisible ink. And the moment you crossed it, even with truth, even with proof, you weren't seen as brave. You were seen as dangerous. You were shut out, labeled difficult, branded crazy, silenced. Monique then said she had been on the other side of that boundary since 2010, not because she lied, but because she refused to stay quiet. "Don't you think it's strange?" she asked the jury, her voice quiet now. "How many people worked with Diddy, Tyler, and Oprah, and then disappeared?" She began to list them, not by name, but by pattern. An actor with one hit show, and then nothing. An award-season darling who faded inexplicably. A screenwriter who turned down a deal and never worked again. "Some of them didn't play the game," she said. "Some of them said no. And some of them saw things. Things they were never supposed to see." She then asked for permission to read a redacted statement from a former actor whose identity is sealed for protection. The court allowed it. The statement described a retreat hosted by a powerful male filmmaker, an exclusive weekend at a private estate, phones taken at the door, contracts signed, and what followed: strange rituals, sexual coercion, and whispered warnings. The statement didn't name names, but its detail mirrored, with eerie precision, the allegations already surfacing in Diddy's trial. NDAs, surveillance, curated parties presented as networking events, yet designed to exploit. Monique looked toward the jury one final time that day and said, "This isn't about one scandal. It's about how the industry protects itself, and what it does to the people who refuse to play along." And with that, the courtroom adjourned. But the reckoning was far from over. "I wasn't blackballed. I was whiteballed by black people." Monique delivers her most devastating truth. Yet, by the time Monique paused, letting the courtroom sit in silence, her words weren't just testimony, they were a cultural reckoning. She didn't name Tyler Perry as the figure behind the retreat testimony, the rituals, or the retreat-like coercion described earlier. But she didn't deny the implication either. She let the jury sit with the discomfort. She let the weight hang in the air like smoke. The judge interjected gently, reminding the room that these were still allegations, but the message had already landed. "The industry isn't protecting art," Monique said. "It's protecting secrets. And the cost of telling the truth? They'll take your career, your reputation, your peace, and leave you to explain to the world why your phone never rings again." When the prosecution asked her directly whether she believed Diddy played a role in her professional sabotage, she nodded. Yes, not at first, but eventually, yes. She hadn't realized it for years, she explained. The damage was slow, methodical, a machine programmed to erase. It wasn't until after her fallout from the Precious campaign that the patterns became clear. That's when she received a phone call from a junior executive who had once worked at Revolt TV, Diddy's media company. "He told me, and I quote," she recalled, "You rubbed the wrong people. This isn't just about Tyler or Oprah. Puff don't like noise either." The courtroom leaned in. Not a single pen scratched paper. Not a single breath broke the stillness. Monique testified that according to this executive, Diddy had been approached by Tyler Perry's team with ideas for future project collaborations. The deal was clear: access to Diddy's platforms, including Revolt, in exchange for mutual cooperation. "I was the obstacle," she said. "They weren't discussing me as talent. They were discussing me as a problem." And then the prosecution dropped the day's most damning evidence: emails, recovered and authenticated, from a major PR firm contracted by both Revolt Media and Tyler Perry Studios. Subject line: Managing Narratives, Monique/Cassie Ventura. The courtroom froze. This was the first time a digital trail had confirmed that Monique's and Cassie Ventura's reputations were being shaped. Together, a coordinated campaign, two different women, same machine. That moment hit hard. Prosecutors let the silence sit before allowing Monique to continue. "They use that word like a virus," she said. "Difficult. Infect one casting director with it, and it spreads like wildfire. Soon your name shows up in a room, and they already have a reason to say no." And then came the line that cracked the silence, wide open. "I wasn't blackballed," she said, voice unwavering. "I was whiteballed. By black people. People who looked like me. People who feared losing their own spot more than they cared about doing right." The words landed with force, unvarnished and unflinching. This wasn't bitterness. This was truth delivered by someone who'd been exiled for telling it. Not because she had failed, but because she had refused to be silent. "I didn't want to be here," she admitted, "but I needed to be. Because what they did to me, what they did to Cassie, what they're doing to young women and men right now, it won't stop unless someone says it with a mic louder than theirs." She recounted that 2 months earlier, the prosecution had reached out. "I said no," she confessed. "Wasn't going to relive it. Wasn't going to expose my family, my trauma, my pain, again." But then, she saw the Prince recording. She saw Diddy shouting in court. She saw Cassie break down on the stand. That was the moment she broke too. She described what happened next, not as a strategic decision, but as a moment of spiritual clarity. "I heard my grandmother's voice," she said. "Baby," she told me, "don't let them write your story without you in the room." And I knew I had to come. "You thought no one would talk." Monique breaks the silence, and Hollywood tremble. Her final minutes on the stand weren't just testimony. They were truth set on fire. When the prosecution asked, "In your opinion, Miss Jackson, what was the root cause of this entire system of silence?" Monique didn't hesitate. "Fear," she said. "Everybody in this industry is scared. Scared to lose a job, scared to lose a deal, scared to lose relevance, and scared to tell the truth. Because people like Puff, like Tyler, and yes, like Oprah, have made it very expensive to do so." The words didn't echo. They landed, like a steel door closing behind a truth too long ignored. Then, in a moment that would make headlines for days, Monique looked across the courtroom and locked eyes with Sean Combs. "You thought nobody would talk," she said, voice low but steady. "That you built an empire strong enough to silence everybody, but now you're sitting in silence. And I hope you finally hear us." Court reporters described Diddy as visibly shaken. His hands trembled. His lead attorney leaned in with urgent whispers. It was the first moment in 6 days where the man once hailed as untouchable no longer looked like he believed his own myth. The gallery didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. The energy had shifted. Monique, ostracized for a decade, had just delivered the most potent testimony of the trial. She had done what nobody else dared. She didn't just speak. She named names. And then came the moment that silenced the room entirely. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was deliberate. Monique looked toward the defense table and uttered a name that, until that moment, had not been formally introduced in 5 days of proceedings. "Tyler Perry." No shouting. No theatrics. Just a name. Loaded, deliberate. Like pulling the pin from a grenade. "You want to talk about power?" she asked the jury. "You want to talk about silence? Ask Mr. Perry why I was blackballed after refusing to work for free." She continued. "And then look who stood beside him at every event. Look who he called. Look who he protected." The gallery gasped. For a split second there was confusion. Tyler Perry wasn't on trial. He wasn't named in the indictment. But that wasn't the point. Monique's aim wasn't legal. It was cultural. "He never lifted a finger to help me," she said. "But he made sure no one else would either. Ask the producers, ask the agents, ask Lee Daniels. I've got the call logs." Then she held up a folder. Unintroduced, unsealed, undeniable. The defense moved to object. The judge sustained it, but the jury had already heard it, and the room already understood. This was no longer just about Sean Diddy Combs. The courtroom, already thick with tension, shifted when Monique took the stand. She didn't enter like someone seeking attention. She entered like someone who had been holding back for years and had finally decided that silence no longer served her. Her testimony began with methodical precision. Names, dates, events. Not dramatic, but deliberate. She recounted the parties not as rumors or whispered legends, but as experiences she had observed with her own eyes. She described non-disclosure agreements not in the abstract, but as documents she had physically seen passed across tables, signed in rooms where the air felt too cold, too still. There was no performance, no anger, just a chilling clarity. What unfolded was less a testimony and more an unveiling. She recounted how opportunities vanished after she had spoken up once before. The phone calls that stopped coming. The meetings that never materialized. The way the industry whispered behind her back, but never said a word to her face. She had been told to stay in line, to be grateful, to smile and accept her place. But the most powerful moment came when she offered more than memory. She offered evidence. There had been a phone call, she revealed, a private conversation in which an influential figure in Hollywood had admitted fault, acknowledged the damage, and begged her not to go public. He said it would bring down too much, too many names, too many careers. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't waver. She simply said her truth and let the silence around her speak volumes. The room froze. Jurors leaned in. Reporters momentarily stopped typing. Even the defense team, usually composed and prepared, looked visibly unsettled. In that moment, something shifted. The trial no longer felt like it was about one man's misdeeds. It became about the system, the invisible scaffolding that allowed him to operate above consequence for decades. It became about the machinery of complicity, the agents who smoothed over incidents, the executives who protected brands over people, the peers who stayed quiet to keep their own positions intact. Monique didn't just challenge Diddy, she challenged the industry itself. And as she stepped down from the witness stand, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. Something irreversible had happened. The jurors were no longer focused solely on the defendant. They had begun to consider everyone who had helped him stay untouchable for this long. And in that shift, the courtroom transformed from a chamber of judgment into a mirror held up to the entertainment world itself.